Denver, the stream. If you're tuning in for the very first time to the Dr. Elisa Show, thank you for listening to this amazing station. KUHS is just an incredible radio station. And thank you for joining me. I am Dr. Elisa. I am the host of the show. And the doctor's real. I've got that PhD that I kind of rock while I'm on the show. And more academic degrees than people need. However, what I really have is life experience. And the people that I bring on the show that I really want to share with you have incredible life experience and incredible messages. You know, the tagline for my show is inspiring a renaissance of spirit. I want to ignite something in you each time you listen to me. If you love the show, and you really should, check out my website, because there's always a replay. And there's my blog. Oh yeah, and I write monthly horoscopes. They're called Soulscapes. And you can see how you can work with me. You can find me at elisarobin.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Elisa Robin. Oh yeah, Twitter. Oh yeah, Instagram. LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Robin is spelled with a Y. It's the only tricky thing out there. I do want to say something special about today's show. Usually, the show is inspirational, and today we'll join that. As you know, though, I've really pushed us to all become philanthropists on this show in some way. And today, more than any day, I want to start with a bit of gratitude. And this is going to be an interesting introduction to today, because there's a lot I want to share, especially with my guest, who trust me, we're going to get to just in minutes. Each of us has a purpose on this planet, and we may not know what that is. It may be something in our future generations. That was really pushed home to me this morning. Today is Yom HaShoah. It is Holocaust Remembrance Day, which may not be a joyful thought of a way to share, to start my show, but it's very important to me. And here's why. My mother's father left Russia because he felt compelled. He was a wandering spirit. He wanted to go do something for his family. He came to the States, and then he went back and got his family out. All of this before World War II. He got his family out by bringing them through Poland, which is where he met my grandmother, because my grandmother's family ran a safe house, much like the safe houses where slaves came through in America and were saved from the South. Because he met her and brought his family here, he brought her here. She came in through Mexico. Thank you, Mexico. And they started a life here. The rest of her entire family in Warsaw, of her immediate family, was wiped out in the Holocaust, was murdered in the camps. And I'm bringing this up because today I was watching the ceremonies held virtually that to honor the memories of those whose names we remember and those whose names we'll never know. And I realized that one man, my grandfather, who followed something inside of him that he did for himself, but then did for his family, changed the course of history. I am here on the radio, inspiring you, hopefully helping you build a glorious life, because that man followed his dreams. That's an incredible thought to me. And trust me, when I talk to my guest, we'll follow that line. Not only do you get to hear from me, you get to check out, I wrote, right, Pirate Wisdom. I've talked to you about that. A leadership book from a pirate point of view. I take after my grandfather. Let's do it from the edge. My first novel, Way of the Well, spirituality with Jewish flavor. Again, I thank my grandfather for that, and I thank all of those people before me in my lineage who embraced a spiritual journey for which they paid. They paid with their lives, many of them. Your life choices matter. Your life choices matter. Okay. And what I encourage you to do, just on that note, before I get to my guest, is start today, this moment that you're listening to me, with a bit of gratitude. And you know I'm encouraging all of us to be philanthropists in this world. Every single one of us, at whatever level you can do that. $1 a month is fine. Make today a day that you are a philanthropist. If you have a favorite charity, whatever is around you. If you don't know where to donate, you know what? I fundraise for the MS Society, and you can donate to my page. And I'll put that link in the Facebook site later. Today, gratitude, philanthropy, oh yeah, and live life free range. Okay, so now we get to the good part of the show. Mariann, thank you for being patient.
No worries.
For all of you who've always listened, you know that everyone who comes on my show, first off, they all turn into dear friends, which is like amazing. But they've inspired me. And so it's not just some sort of like random person. It's someone I admire and somebody who ignited something in me. And boy, this is a woman who has done that. So, Mariann Cantwell is an author of this amazing book. I mean, the title itself just makes you want to do something, right? A free-range human, as in not caged. And just the thought of that. I had to pick up the book. I had to read it. I had to listen to her videos. I had to listen to her TED Talk. And I am so incredibly blessed, Mary. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I am so excited. I loved that introduction. So much to say to you today. Okay,
so what I want to start with, because that was such a brief introduction, what I'd love you to do is, you're inspired, and you inspire others, and something ignited in you to make you, to push you to become free range. Can you give us maybe the intro to that journey of yours? Just wherever you'd like to start.
Well, actually, I'm going to start somewhere a bit different to where I normally start with you because of your introduction that you gave. So, as you can hear, I grew up in Australia, even though I live in California now. And I grew up, both of my parents were immigrants from different countries. So, my father's English, my mother was Mauritian. You can Google it. It's a tiny little island. And so, I grew up speaking French in a country that, in the countryside in Australia, in a place that wasn't very multicultural. And so, also, I was a total nerd. So, I really grew up with an experience of not fitting in, right? Like, it was not a diverse area at all. And so with that kind of shaped a lot of my life. So I was the person who, I think very much like you, was very academic because I knew that's where I got recognition, that's where I'd get love, that's where I could achieve. And so I went through, and I want to set the scene like this because when people see my book and read the book, they do your own thing, live life on your terms. They can think I'm a real rebel, but actually that's not my past. That's not who I am. Instead, I was the one who thought, if I just tick every box, or check every box in American, and then I will get the prize at the end, because that's how we are raised, right? If I do the right thing, and if I graduate top of my class in high school, at university. I was actually on an academic path, which you might not know, and then I went traveling for a year, very luckily, in Europe, because that's what you do when you're Aussie. You work in pubs and you travel for a year. It's a rite of passage. And so I did that. And when I was there, I ended up talking my way into jobs. So I ended up working for a big record label. I ended up working for a multinational, very well-known entertainment company. And suddenly, I wasn't the top performer anymore. Suddenly, I was in a job, I think it was, I'd been there like a year, and I wasn't best in class. In fact, I was really bad at the job, and I had never had that experience. I was like president of my debate club, like I knew how to get things done, like I was that person. And suddenly I was there, and I was in tears every evening. I was going home, and I was like, what's happened? I did everything right. I've got the dream job. Everyone's like, you're so lucky to have that job. I have no idea how I got it. I was way too young for it. And I felt like, is this it? I felt smaller and smaller every day. And it was one day when I was, actually I'll say it was Disney, so I was working for Disney. And I was trying to get out of my job every day by going to every free training event they put on, which is the wonderful thing about a multinational. You go to training events, and I went to one where they talked about personality profiles, and I did my Myers-Briggs personality profile. And I remember it was such a big event for me, and I went up to the facilitator at the end and I said, do people like me, can we be happy at work? Because I didn't think that was possible. I thought my personality could never be happy. And he looked at me and he said, people like you are usually the happiest at work. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he just said to me, he goes, your job is made for your opposite personality. So every day you're coming to work and you're having to pretend to be someone you're not. And it was this huge moment. And it actually set me off on a several years of journey, which I could put together in one sentence, which was, I quit my job to try to do I didn't know what I was doing. Obviously, I had no clue what I was doing. I was trying to do consulting and corporate training. Within a few months, realized I had no clue. Went back into a job, but this time, the job I went into paid me for the things that I had to hide away in my previous role. I was being paid for the exact things that I was being told were too much, were not part of the job description. Suddenly, major clients were paying our consultancy for me to do that. From there, I ended up building out my own, I had a portfolio career. I quit my job in a much more positive way, went free range, which is my term for creating something on your terms. And that it went from there. I wrote a little blog many years ago called Free Range Humans. Turns out that was the most popular thing I did. Everyone's know about that. So I founded Free Range Humans, and now it's a book being translated into loads of languages. I've got an awesome following. I run courses on really not just how do you start a business. It's not really what we do. It's more like, how do you find your right path so that you don't have to put your personality in a box to get paid, and so you don't have to put your dreams in a box until retirement. That's what I'm interested in. So yeah, that's my long answer. That is how I got there, by not fitting in.
That's a perfect answer, and there's so many pieces of that I want to dig into. Oh my gosh, I'm not sure where to start. How about, so let's take this piece. We are often told, right, and you and I have had this conversation, I was always told I was too passionate. I know people, women especially, who say, you're too assertive, you're too creative, you're too something, and you're better off if you don't do that. You talk about, you just mentioned it, and you talk about it in your book, you encourage us to shine a light on our uniqueness, on maybe even embrace that. And I told you, I've come to embrace that. People have told me I'm dangerous and too passionate and a little too mysterious and lots of stuff, and I just claim all those words. You talk about them as superpowers. Can you expand on that?
Yes. So, I'll definitely use you as an example. You're such a great example. But let's continue from the story I just gave, because that'd be
absolutely. Let's go that way. Yes.
Which is, we'll do both. We're going both directions here. So one was, great example right there. We don't even need, because I obviously help people start and grow their business and creative projects. But you can think of that in jobs as well. In one job, my tendency to think, I'm a big picture thinker. I am not detail oriented. I think about, how can we improve this? How can we change this? I'm very passionate like you, good at presenting. That wasn't useful in a job that was essentially about analysis and number analysis and accuracy. And so what was the piece of it that was useful was presenting, and I was able to do that maybe 5% of the time. However, I was able to take that 5% and blow it up into 95% of my next job, because, and this is the line I want everyone to keep in mind, weaknesses are just strengths in the wrong environment. That's what we are never told. Your weakness right now is probably a weakness. Every weakness or strength is a trend, right? If it's in the wrong environment, it's a weakness. It's a liability. If I was the most analytical, detail-oriented person in the world, in an environment where I needed to be free-flowing and creative, it's possible that would be a liability. In a job like my job at Disney, you would get promoted for it. So number one, it's just a trait. Two, strengths are exactly the same thing. And so that's the first thing I want to say. And so our biggest clue to our biggest superpowers, going to you now, is it's usually something that we have been told or we have decided is either too much, I am too passionate, I've been told to tone it down, or is not enough. I am not extroverted enough.
Yes.
I am not bold enough. So I always go, if you want to find your biggest strengths, go and look in the places where we hold a little bit of shame, because they're there, because your biggest strengths, your superpowers, they bubble out of you. You can't stop them. And so at some point you'll have done it in the wrong environment and you'll have internalized, keep it down or pretend to be bigger than you are. It's always one of the two.
So I just had a thought from the very beginning of our conversation. Do you think that feeling of never fitting in was actually an advantage that you and I shared?
Yeah.
Because, and I always felt like I never fit in with anyone, my family, I had to sort of grow into. And I majored in something I loved, but I took a job that in that field that I hated. And again, because of fit. I wonder, is that kind of a gift to us to be able to experience not fitting in so we can embrace ourselves? Have you ever thought of it that way?
Yes, I absolutely have. I think that if we're people who knew that we didn't fit in and who felt it, I have noticed that people who have grown up in very more homogenous environments who didn't have that experience, maybe they were able to hide it a little better, they still have that feeling. But that feeling hasn't been manifested strongly enough that they're able to embrace it. So what happens, very often I work with people like this, they've been able to pass so well that their fear of not passing by changing something is actually greater. So there's actually a little bit more work to do. It's not you can't do it. I've definitely done this work with people of crafting your own course. But yeah, having the experience of that means, we know the reality is no one is a perfect fit everywhere. There is no such thing. That's kind of what my TED Talk's about, is literally saying, even if you look at the outside of someone, they look like they're a perfect fit. The only reason that they're a perfect fit in their environment is that they created that environment. So we look at the leaders of an industry, we look at the thought leaders, we look at someone who's at the forefront of what they're doing, and we think that person has found their place. And the reality usually is that person has created their place. Usually someone's a leader because they didn't fit the mold before, therefore they stood out in some way. It could simply be that they're in a field where there's lots of passionate people and they're very good at being a lot more succinct. And so people really start going, I like that. I like how they're tight in what they're saying. And suddenly they're known or they're established. And then new people look at them and say, oh gosh, I'm too passionate now. I need to be tight and succinct. So we always look, everything's always a reaction to the other thing, like even generationally, like the next generation reacts against the one before. In your field and the people around you, it's a series of reactions. And the only one that's right is the one that fits you, because everything else will just be a shadow, like a tiny part of yourself.
Wow, that is brilliant. That's just, and I have to say reassuring. So every one of our listeners out there who has felt like they don't, and still feels perhaps like they don't fit in, that's another gift. It's like, look at that. And I agree that we measure ourselves so often by looking at people who seem overnight success, brilliant in their field, and many of them are. They're very brilliant. But they found the fit and created the environment by finding themselves first. Right? I mean, that's what you're saying. So before I forget, because everyone is going to want to find you, right? We know that Free Range Human, all right, I'm going to hold your book up again for everyone on we're live on video Facebook and on Twitter. You can buy this on Amazon, correct? Free Range Human.
Yes.
Right? But how else do they find you? We're just going to do a commercial for you right now. And what else do you do? Because people are all going to want to have a contact with you, a connection with you.
The easiest way is actually, if you're on Instagram, I can shortcut this. Go to Free Range Mariann. That's MARIANNE. Free Range Mariann. The link in my bio there, in my profile, links to everything. So easiest way is go to Instagram and look up Free Range Mariann. Easy one to remember if you're out walking while listening to this. And go and follow me, and all the stuff's linked to you. But if you're not, then what you can do is you can just Google free range human Mariann, you'll find me, or just go to free-range-humans.com, and there's a bunch of different stuff I'm doing. So you can see the link to my book there. You can see we're about to run a new program called Secret Superpowers, to find and use your secret superpowers to either find your direction, to get more ease and success in whatever you're doing, all that good stuff. That's on free-range-humans.com or at free-range Mariann. Oh, and my one tip is, if you want to hear from me, is I write a weekly email called the Friday Love Letters. So go and drop your name in anything that you see on that page that has an email field. Put your name in there, and you will hear from me every week on my Friday Love Letters.
Awesome, awesome. We'll repeat that again. So if you're just joining me here on the Dr. Elisa Show on KUHS Denver, having an amazing conversation with Mariann Cantwell, who wrote Free Range Human and has many other talents. So thank you for joining us. Okay, so I have so many directions this conversation could go. Do you think that some of the reasons that it is difficult to find our superpower is that other people, I think you call them beige people, find us intimidating? Are people trying to teach us to behave because they think it's better for us? Or is it scary when somebody actually embraces their power? Do you have thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I agree with you. Yes, to all of that. So there's a chapter in my book, one of my personal favorite chapters, called the Beige Army. And it's exactly about this. It's about, I'm sure anyone who's ever had half an idea or half a thought about anything different, you've met the Beige Army. It's the people who will say, "Oh, are you sure that's wise?" Or "Don't you need another degree for that?" Or "Isn't that very competitive?" Or like whatever the word is. But it's like, it's not the content of what they're saying, because sometimes those things can be useful. It's actually the tone. Like, we all know the tone. I suspect women know it really well. I certainly know quite a few men who know it too. And I find it's really useful to have a name for that, because what happens otherwise is we think, I'm the weird one. They're right because they're normal. And I like to reset that. Naming is very powerful. So I say that they're not normal. They're called the Beige Army, and they're afraid of you doing something different because it reflects very much on them. And I can say, as I've done this work for well over a decade, that is the truth. It reflects very much on them. It reflects that maybe they have a lot of fear in their life. It reflects maybe they're frustrated that they're in a position that maybe they feel like they can't do something. It could maybe be some care as well. It's not always negative. It can come from a place of trying to protect, which can also be smothering, but also trying to protect. And I would say, so when you hear that, don't go, they're normal, I'm the weird one. No one wants to be the weird one, not for more than 5 minutes. Like, no, they're the Beige Army. This is how they respond, and don't fight them. This is not your battle. You will not win and be where you want to be by beating them in an argument. So we just step away and we do the work. And that's where, trust me, I met the Beige Army when I was starting out. They're now some of my biggest fans. And the people in my life who were like, is that wise? And now like quoting my work back to me. So trust me, it turns around in a while. So just like get away from that for if you need to.
So it's so fascinating. I think one of the reasons your book and your work resonates so well with me is I can think of specific examples in my life with what you just said. Somebody asked me what I always wanted to be when I was a child, and I said an author. And I remember reading something to a family member that I had written as a kid, and I was always in sort of the fantasy, darkish sort of genre, even as a child. And I was told, well, 1, I should write happier things, and 2, I'd have to major in English. And I did neither of those, and my second novel, Dark Fire, should be out at some point. We'll get through an editor and we'll get it out. But I found that part of me that writing was always wonderful. And in fact, some of my academic friends have publications because of me. That I'm not the great academic writer, but I'm the great bubble it up and get it started, and then they're the academic polisher, and then we get academic publications. So interesting how that part. So I love that. Oh my gosh. Let's do something. Let's go, because you mentioned something else. You talked about generation briefly, and I'm very interested right now in especially women who have been so adversely impacted by 2020. We know that large numbers of women either have left corporate life, they may have wanted to anyway, but now they had to, or cut back because they were the ones homeschooling children, or they were in the service industry, they lost jobs, and most of the women I now talk with in my own practice are trying to talk about side hustles. And I tell people, you're really well off if you get fired young, get fired really young, and then you'll always know you need a plan B. So I'm wondering about your thoughts about either generational differences, right? So I think I was sort of free range even though I had careers in industry, because I always had a plan B and C and a side hustle. But also, what is this time now? How is the free range human so relevant, especially for women, in this time? Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I've been, as I said, doing this work for a while now,
Right.
and I have for a long time been thinking this is just the sensible thing to do. Is the way I see it is, and by the way, I'll go back one step. I know your listeners are around the world, but a lot are in the US. So I moved to the US a few years ago, and even though I had clients here before, it didn't hit me how insecure jobs are here. I didn't understand the concept of at-will employment, and apologies to overseas listeners, it is insane. You don't have job security. Like, it really blew my mind. So when I wrote my book, I wrote it in the UK for an international audience, and I said, well, you know, you only have as much security as your notice period. So I meant, well, instead of saying I have a safe job, you should look at your contract. People who don't live in the US, look at your contract and say, what's my notice period? You have a contract for that period. That's what you have, okay? And then you have the employment laws that will back that up. But that doesn't mean that if the economy goes down, you can't lose job. This is when I quit my last job. It was just after the 2008, I think it was, crash. And I worked in an office overlooking Lehman Brothers. And so I was actually weird backstory. I was in Israel and Jordan at the time, went offline for a week. I remember turning the TV on and literally seeing the view from my office of all these people in the last financial crash walking out with boxes, and it hit me. That was actually a whole generation of us to quit our jobs then, because I was like, I am working for a company. I was not working for Lehman Brothers. I was working for another company until like midnight, and this is the job security I get? This is what's going to happen? Absolutely not. I knew I wanted out. It actually accelerated my journey by maybe a year. So I already had that attitude. I already knew that. And then I get to the US and I was like, oh, you know, you have as much like security as your notice period. And people are like, what do you mean contract? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I learned that a lot of people here, and you know, including people who are very senior in big companies, seem to not have contracts with actual notice periods. So I would say wherever you live in the world, we need to rewire this idea of job security and rewire it as you're a free range human, but you have one client, and that client is your employer. Now that client is loyal. That client might be backed up, depending where you live in the world, by some great laws, but you have one client. Now anyone, as you know, who is in business would say, that client might be loyal, but that's a lot of eggs in one basket. So that's where I came from. When I quit my job, I said, I am never, I quit. I didn't lose my job, but I think it could have happened if I'd stayed much longer because of the financial situation in the world. I said, I'm never going to put my eggs in one basket where one industry or one organization could go down and I go down with it. Yes. Learning how to make income on your terms, as anyone who's their own boss will really know, how to not just have one trick in the book, be able to do things in a very diverse way is the only way to have real security in this world. So whether someone wants to stay in a job, have a side hustle, or by the way, if you have a business and you've been doing the same thing in the same way for quite a while, I would probably view that in a very similar way and say, if we're putting all our eggs in that basket, what happens when that changes? What happens when the algorithm changes if you're reliant on Facebook? Things like that. So I'm always looking at, let's be diverse and let's take care of ourselves in a world where things have really changed.
Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating commentary you're making about companies, especially 2020. And I come from a world of higher ed, and so many colleges, small colleges, have closed over the last decade and accelerated over the last 5 years because they're still doing what they were always doing. But the demographics change, students have changed, desires have changed. And so very much that, I love that notion that I've always been free range. I've definitely had one big client, but I always knew that one client could change their mind about me and that I needed a side hustle. I needed B, C, and D plans to back me up. Do you think there's also something different about the generations in terms of, so I'm definitely a different generation than you, how we approach it? Or do you hear from your clients who are younger versus older?
Yeah.
That how they,
there is a difference.
Yeah, could you talk about that?
So actually, this is what's surprising me is in the last few, like a year or two, I've seen a real resurgence in Gen Z for my book, which I did not write it for Gen Z. And I'm really surprised at it. Like, I'm getting like tagged and stuff, and I'm like, is this for you? Like, I never thought of that. But I actually think the reason is, and the reason I mention this, is these are people who are in their early 20s. So I wrote this book for people who were like late 20s right up to their 60s.
Right.
And the fact that Gen Z is picking it up earlier, I think is an indication of a trend. And I have another data point on it. I have, fun fact, I have 22 cousins, I think, on one side, first cousins. The ones who are the most into my book on that side, early 20s. That's never been the case before. This book has been out for quite a few years, and now that generation is going, this is a thing. So what I think that means is we have a generation coming up that is already expecting insecurity, that can see that you can put stuff out and it can happen. Whereas before, when I first started talking about that, I mean, YouTubers were barely making money. Like, it was such a different world. And so now, like, I updated the book 2 years ago to like really reflect, a year ago actually, to reflect where we are. But I'm seeing a lot more ease and a lot more realization. This is how the world is. This is where we go. What I see generationally in different generations, I think things have changed over the last year, where the stuff that I used to have to like really repeat about, it's possible to do your own thing, you can do it. It doesn't have to be said, which is such a relief when you get to the good stuff. I'm like, we know we can put something out there, right? Now let's just work out how to do it in a way that fits us. So I think that the last 2020 has brought people's realizations about a few things forward several years. One of them is what I've said for years, which is offices are very useful for certain things, but they're not useful for most people most of the time. I'm a huge believer in that. I cannot think with people around me. I can't do my best work, and I'm not alone in that. So it's useful for some things, but not for everything. A lot of people have realized that. A lot of companies have realized that. People are realizing how insecure things are again. So I'm seeing people who I know personally who have very senior jobs, who are starting side hustles. Like, I'm seeing that, and I'm seeing people in business as well seeing things differently. So I feel like generationally things have really come together, but I'd be watching who's coming through, because that is something I didn't expect to see Gen Z like really embracing this stuff.
It's something I think we always forget, that the younger generation is supposed to be the generation that shakes things up. We all get upset. I mean, I happen to love teenagers. It's my favorite sort of developmental stage. And my friends will send me their teenagers at times. So for a woman who's never had children, trust me, I've had more teenagers than you can count. And their job is to shake up our thinking, is to make us look at the world differently, because the world's changing. And you can tell last year was in many ways a battle between no, don't change, and it's already changed. Catch up. And so I think that's part of what you're capturing. I do love this notion too of offices, and you and I've never talked about this, but I would just sort of love your a couple thoughts on it. Every time that I had to commute to an office at a certain time, I wondered who came up with this crazy idea that all of us should get into some kind of tin can and pack up the highway to get to somewhere on time, where we might get punished if we're not on time, which means we have to get on the road earlier and then leave at the same. What is that? One of the reasons you went free range?
Oh, you can read about it in the beginning of my book. 100%. I thought it was insane. Like, it sounds great. I'm all about effectiveness and doing things that make sense, right?
Yes.
And I'm just like, I remember I'd be commuting to the office and being like, why can't I do this at home? Like, this is a crazy, crazy thing. I hate the office. I hate the commute. I think better when I get home. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it benefit everyone? And I feel like that, of course, it's not true for everyone. Some people need to be in teams for different reasons, personality-wise and work-wise. Mm-hmm. But a lot of us, that's not the case. And yeah, I think it's just really great that we, okay, I'm not saying the pandemic is great, but I feel like one of the silver linings of the pandemic, to be clear, has been that people have started to realize, well, when things start to go back to a, normal, whatever that looks like, maybe there are other ways of doing this. Maybe there are other ways of doing what we do. I also say one more thing is, I have also really been struck in the pandemic about what we were saying before about security really hit home, because, when things are really stable economically, it can seem like, oh, it's not just, a job isn't just, free range with one employer. It is secure, it is real. It really hit me how people who were genuinely free range, and by that I don't mean a contractor who could be let go or someone who didn't have diverse income streams, truly free range, their income didn't get affected. Right. And I mean truly free range. I know people with businesses who obviously got very, very affected. But if you knew how to pivot, if you knew all of these things, I really saw it. And, in terms of philanthropy, one of the things I did a lot in the pandemic was I'd go on Twitter, and there were these threads of people who were literally not able to pay their bills and put their Venmo or whatever on. And I would, whenever I was able to, send out money, because I was able to bring money in. And that was something I haven't really actually talked about it publicly ever, but you raised it before and I wanted to acknowledge it. What we do for ourselves, if we don't believe that work world is as stable, can really impact other people when everything hits the fan for them. So I just want to keep that in mind, that I think it's a really important side of it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point, that when you're free range, I call it living on the loose. You're always ready to pivot. You're ready to adapt. You understand. Even in academia, I know there are faculty who have tenure, and they're like, well, I can't get fired. Oh, really? All they have to do is close your program. That's it, right? And so, I mean, and then having been an academic dean, I spent a lot of time listening to people complain about these tenure jobs they had, because they felt they could make more money doing something else, so they were upset and they wanted changes, but they were, always reassure me they couldn't get fired because of tenure. I'm like, if you don't like it here, why are you so glad that you are guaranteed staying here? There and stuff you talk about in your book, but I want to shift a little bit. So, and it's not something you say in your book, but I really want to talk about this, and we've talked about it personally. I could tell when I was ready to get out of my last position, because I was at a very conservative institution, and I put purple streaks in my hair as an academic dean. And when they didn't really get noticed, I changed them to turquoise, so they really wouldn't get noticed in my hair. And at the time I thought, I wonder if this is an indication that I'm ready to leave. And then, of course, by mutual agreement, I did leave very soon after that. I'm wondering about sort of synchronicity and serendipity, which are both, they're a bit different. Do you find that happens, and that when we, as Joseph Campbell says, when we start following our bliss, doors open, and all of a sudden we realize we have other opportunities? So that's a huge question, but you want to just riff off of synchronicity and serendipity?
Here's my idea, that we have to prove ourselves to the world, and I don't mean that in an opinion way. I mean that in an intention way. It is very easy to have an idea and to talk about it, and then the easiest thing in the world is to find reasons why someone else's idea isn't a good one, or why our idea isn't going to happen, not now, maybe someday, right? So those things are very easy. And my, I guess, slight theory about the world is that the universe is waiting for us to step up and prove ourselves and do the thing. And until we do that, it's not going, I think Elizabeth Gilbert talked about it as well in Big Magic, they're not going to trust us with opportunities. Why would the world trust us with opportunities when we just talk? So that's why in my book, one of the big things we talk about is doing free range projects, which is taking action in a time limited way, not necessarily changing anything else, but actually taking action towards something. And in the doing of it, this is where doors open. So I'll give you an example.
Good.
I should give you a personal example. It's not a project, but an example of when I took action and doors open. So it was actually my job at Disney, and I was not ready, by the way. There was no books like mine around. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, I have to get out of here. I'm actually going insane. And I had this idea I was going to go out and like consult, etc., etc. And I didn't know what I was doing. But I was a bit younger, so I could do this. So I was going to quit my job, and I was like, how am I going to do? How am I going to contract? In the last week while I was there, because we have a long notice period, I get a call from our Asia office saying, hey, we hear that you're leaving. Are you coming back to Australia anytime soon? I was like, yeah, I'm not going to come back and visit my dad. They're like, well, would you be interested in a contract with us? And it basically was doing the thing that I was the best at, which is the presentations and like, how do we package information for people? They were like, we love your work on that, which was so little part of my job. Why don't you come and do it for us? And that was my actual first free range gig. It was really cool. It lasted maybe a month. I can't really remember. I wasn't in an office, but I was freelance. I could do whatever I wanted. So I was in Sydney on the water. I loved it. It was the first thing I did. If I had gone around, and I was looking for opportunities before I handed my notes, if I'd gone around and looked, that would never have come up because I would never have told anyone in the company. So that's one example. Now, that doesn't say that happens all the time, but it does happen a really unusual amount of time. Until we put ourselves out there, maybe it's a project rather than quitting our job, the world will not respond with opportunities. Like, that's just how it is.
Can you give us an example too? Because I love this idea and I really want our readers to get it, because I know what's happening. Our listeners, excuse me, your readers, our listeners. I know what's happening. People are out there thinking, well, yeah, she did it. Oh, look at her. She's beautiful. She's smart. She's articulate. She has this experience. And your book says everyone is a gift. You will help them find that gift, right? I mean, that's some of the similar work we do. And they too can do this. You don't talk about how to launch a business. You do talk about finding what they can do. Can you give me another example of somebody you've worked with who did a project? Just so that our listeners can
I do want to clarify, I actually do talk about launching a business. And the way I talk about it, I want to clarify this because I think it's really important. I actually rewrote the book in 2019 because originally I talked very specifically about launching a business. And it was about launching it very much in the way I did. So the first edition of the book basically said, hey, like, to launch a business, you need to have your own brand, like create a following and all this stuff, which in my experience at the time had been the best way. As I got a little bit more mature in my work, I'd worked with thousands of people, no joke. I had courses, I've had a lot of people, and we profile everyone on different personality profiles. So I had a lot of data. And I started seeing a really interesting trend. The very intelligent people that I worked with, who were not extroverts like me, who didn't have a particular type of personality profile, who were actually often academics, funnily enough, would actually really struggle to start something, even though they were really amazing at everything else in their life. This was a real struggle. And so I went on a few years journey, and I worked with a colleague of mine who's a personality profile expert, and we looked at what were the different ways that different types of people had success of doing some of their own terms. And I can just shortcut that and say, we have a thing called the free range styles in my book. And if you are not an extrovert, if you have had any of these thoughts, I would really encourage you to read that, because it turns out not everyone needs to have a big shiny brand. Most people, by the way, who are free range, you don't know their names, because you don't need to know their names for them to have full-time success. They don't need to come on a radio show and talk, because they're what we call trusted people, and they have a very different method. So I just want to put that out there for anyone. It's that the worst thing that I think we can do, and I say this a lot to my clients these days, I say, just because we like someone's energy, we like their vibe, and we like the outcomes that they got, doesn't mean that their method, the way they got there, is the way that you're going to get there. And I think it's so important to, no one's saying this, I think it's crucial to hear. Just because, just because you might like me, your personality might be different to me, and that's what we do with people. We go find your own place, and we help you to do that. But yeah, and I know I went off track, but I want to like just go in and say
you are never
there
off
are
track.
so many ways.
You are never off track.
Ways of doing this.
You're creating the track as we have the conversation, so you're never off track. So I do love that, and I have to say, when I looked at the personalities, I do believe I'm a trusted person in those styles. One of the things that always makes me laugh is I'm a true introvert. I'm actually an ambivert. I'm pretty balanced in that. But because of that introvert side of me, extroverts are always trying to push me. And they don't understand that if you just hand me a microphone, magic happens and I show up. So instead of putting the extroverts up on stage to give speeches so they can talk about themselves, give the introvert the mic and let me do the fundraising. Let me be that person. So it's interesting how the way people see us.
That's interesting. I actually, I'd love to have a session with you. I think you are an extrovert because that's me as well. Extroverts, like, I am actually not socially confident. I'm confident now because you're interviewing me. If you hand me a mic, I'm confident on the mic, right? I'm an extrovert, I'm confident on the mic. You put me in a room full of people who I don't know and they don't know who I am, and I am like, how can I get into the corner and like be really awkward? Because I'm super awkward if I'm not one of. So I would just say there's a lot of, the reason I share that is I think that there's a lot of nuance in our personalities, right? And it's like, there's no such thing as like, some people are like blazing like extrovert in a social sense. Some people are great when you hand us a mic, socially awkward, and some people are actually would hate being handed the mic. So I think there's a whole, I just want to give permission for any introverts listening who are like, I don't like the mic at all. That's cool too. You don't have to.
That's
so
absolutely
this
cool.
is just that.
And
I think you and I are very similar actually.
Absolutely, and I think that's why we're both ambiverts, which is somewhere in the center, because it's a gradation, right? It's a continuum, right? And so, like a non-binary continuum, like where are you on this? And I'm an ambivert. In terms of energy, I refuel alone. I love that. I need that alone time.
Same.
In terms of groups and what I can do, I can turn my extrovert on. So it's fascinating. So thank you for correcting me on that.
No, just I feel like you're such a wonderful example. I want to interview you though.
and let's go back again to this sort of serendipity and this because actually there's just so many things you bring up in my mind. There are so many ways to launch a business and so many people who will teach us, and I think one of the things you do bring out is go ahead and listen to all of that, but then take the pieces that work for you, the way you will launch. Is that in alignment with what you do?
It really is, and always keeping in mind the idea that just because you like what someone's outcome doesn't mean that their exact path is right. They'll have things to teach you, right? But we have to like work out where we fit. And the other one is, a question I ask people a lot is, what game are you playing? And it's a coaching question I ask. And that means you remember that everyone has a different aim and everyone is trying to achieve something a bit different. So if you see someone put out a really cool Instagram like a video or something, you're like, oh, I need to do Instagram videos. It would be really useful to check in and say, what game were they playing? Maybe they just want to express themselves, right? Maybe they are trying to reach a certain type of person. Maybe, like, there's a lot of reasons they could have done that, but maybe aren't aligned with the game you're playing. And I think that's a very important thing to ask yourself. I also see this with people who are early on in their business, or look at people who are established and say, they look like this and they've got this structure behind them. I need that. And it's like, no, but the game you're playing is to work out your direction, or the game you're playing is to get your first clients. And that game is very, very different to expanding an existing business. So I just find a really grounding question, you write it down if you want to. What game am I playing? And it's a real way of staying in our lane in a really positive and freeing way, because your lane is huge and you have lots of games in it. But like staying in our lane and saying, you and I took place of it yesterday, like we live in the weirdest time right now where we have more input from everyone around the world at the click of a button. And I think that the new question for the next decade is going to be, how do I hold my ground, stay my course while also progressing and not getting sidetracked by all the other versions of me that could be, by all the other games that I could be playing? I think that is the question we're going to end up moving forward with.
That is brilliant. So I just want to rephrase it for our listeners, that how do I claim my uniqueness? How do I walk in that without fear, without apology, owning who I am, and understanding that I will learn many things. I will learn things about business and things about launches and things about personality indices. And from that, I choose what is in alignment with me, as opposed to going down everybody else's rabbit hole. Does
Absolutely.
that, okay.
100%, because I can tell you that is not going down other people's rabbit holes is the way to, I say it's like playing the lottery. You'd better hope that they're very similar to you and have the same goals and are in a similar situation.
That's right.
And I hand on heart, I'll say, because when I started out, I did what everyone else did. I thought, oh, the way I did it was so easy for me, right? It must be easy for everyone else. And it took years in. I actually pulled all my programs down at one point, because I was like, I was doing nothing that different to other people in the industry. Right. But I was like, something's wrong here. Like, I was having a six-figure membership. I had all this stuff. And I actually pulled it all down. And I just said, it's working for a certain type of person. And I can't see anyone saying, where do you go to work out what is the right type of business model for you? What's the way of branding in line with you? And so I actually rebuilt everything. Took like a year or two out and rebuilt the whole thing to really honor who you are. Because I always say, like, you are the biggest asset in your business. You are the biggest asset in your career, in your life. And if you try it, imagine if you had a vacuum cleaner and you said the only way to be successful is to be a dishwasher. It would do a really bad job at washing the dishes, even though it was a really clever, cool vacuum cleaner.
Absolutely.
And so I see that. I always joke about that, because sometimes people are like, oh, well, doing things as you is an optional extra. I'm like, no, you're the biggest asset in anything you do. Like, it's only rational when you think about it that way to go, maybe I should know how that biggest asset works at its best. Maybe I shouldn't go and be a vacuum cleaner trying to be a dishwasher. Once we think like that, I just see a lot of things just clicking into place, and things can be a lot easier. I'm going to say one more thing I just realized we haven't talked about around this, which is in our Western work culture, we are taught that in order for work to be of value, it has to feel hard, right? I think we talked about this in the book. Yes. Right? So it is hard. It's called work for a reason. And we don't really think about the impact our work has so much as how it felt when we did it. Well, I have to work harder. Or you do something that just works quickly and you think, oh, what else should I be doing? And it's the easiest example is, imagine if you have a kid and you're in a position to get them tutoring. Which one subject would you choose? Their best one or their worst? I mean, if you're like most parents, you choose their worst. I know this because my parents did that for me with maths. Terrible at it, or math in the US. And that's how we're taught to think. Our annual review, our quarterly review. We look at our weaknesses. And so we look at what we're not as good at and we say, let's go harder. And so work therefore feels hard. And so that means that we miss the ease and we miss the moments where things can work. And that's what I'm really, really big on doing that, because that's when you get best outcomes. And you actually, going back to the beginning, you impact the world around you better because you're in your best flow, which means you're using the best parts of yourself. Does that make sense to you?
It makes absolute sense. It makes absolute sense. You probably aren't going to believe this, but we are almost at the end of the show. I have like 2 minutes left, and I think you need to come back. And we need to, because there's so many other great conversations I want to have with you. So in this last couple minutes, that was a great closing message. I'd love to know what keeps you inspired, though.
I have to say, it's watching people really do something as them. So take that moment where they could have said that's too much. Take that moment where they could have said that's too boring, and double down on it, and they see the magic. I see it all around me all the time. That's one of the things that inspires me the most. It's not like what you do, it's how you do it in line with yourself. It's a game changer to watch.
Awesome. So if you've been listening, this has been the Dr. Elisa Show here on KUHS Denver with the amazing, incredible author of A Free Range Human. You've got to read the book. You've got to contact her. Just Google Free Range Human. You'll find her. Google Mariann Cantwell. You'll find her. Instagram, Facebook, she's everywhere. She has an amazing book. She has workshops. And actually a workshop coming up on finding your superpowers. Even if you think, no, I don't need this. I'm good. This is amazing work, and it's incredible. If you're looking for a speaker for some virtual event you're having, well, here she is. contact her for that. You can find her in lots of places. I want to thank you all for listening. This has been an amazing hour. And if you missed it, guess what? Go to my website maybe tomorrow. I will have it posted up on my website, and you will be able to listen to it again and again. My website, elisarobin.com. Robin is spelled with a Y. And you can find me in all these wonderful places. And what do I want to leave you with? I want to leave you with a hope that something inside you, because of the show, just ignited, that a flame grew inside of you, and you feel inspired. And that you know that following that inspiration will not only lead you to the life you crave, you'll be following your soul's craving, that you will have an impact on this world. You may never know what it is, but trust me, the impact you have on the world will not go unnoticed and may flow down the generations after you. So please, fan that flame and stay inspired. See you in 2 weeks.